Well, moving on, while the administration begins implementing financial regulatory reform, the priority for the Obama administration is still job creation and the economy.
And there are concerns on both sides of the aisle on the nation's growing debt and differing opinions on the best way to scale back short and long-term deficits. Republican Senator Gregg is ranking member on the Budget Committee and is somebody that enjoys coming on and talking about the deficit. So we're going to start there, Senator Gregg. Look, let's start with this, the Bush tax cuts. We know that there is two sides to this argument. You got the Democrats that say keep all of them except the tax cuts for the top 2%. The Republican argument is no, extend them all, even if just temporarily. If you're in the extend them all category on this, Senator Gregg, shouldn't Republicans come up with a way to pay for this tax cut?
Well, taxes are the people's money. You know, it's not like the government owns this money and has a right to it. Basically, this is money people earn, and they should be able to keep it in order to run their lives and in order to make investments and create jobs. So I don't subscribe to the view that when you cut taxes or when you maintain a tax situation like we have today, what we're actually talking here is whether the Obama administration is going to increase taxes. That you basically have to pay for keeping taxes at their present levels. I just don't subscribe to that view. I mean, it's not our money. It's not the federal government's money. It's people working for a living who earn the money who should be able to keep the money under the present tax law. Our problem with our deficits today are not that we're not getting enough revenues over the long run, over the next 10 years. In fact, the Obama administration projects that the revenues will be much higher than they've historically been over the next 5 to 6 years. They're projecting 20% of GDP will come into the federal government in revenues, and historically we've gotten about 18%. The problem is the explosion, and it's literally an explosion in the size of the government that's occurred under this administration and this Congress. They've taken government from 20% of GDP up to 24% of GDP, and they're going to take it up to 27% of GDP, and this is driven almost entirely by all these new programs they're adding, especially in the healthcare area, because they genuinely believe, the Democratic leadership of this Congress and the administration believes, that if you grow government, you create prosperity. Well, you don't. You create debt, and you create deficits, and that does not lead to prosperity.
Senator Gregg, you don't make the argument, though, that the tax cuts or not doing a tax hike in your terminology, that it would pay for itself, right? I mean, I know a lot of folks will say if you cut taxes, that generates growth, and I think most economists would agree with that. But the argument is not that it will generate sufficient growth to essentially pay for themselves, right?
Well, it depends on what type of tax reductions you're doing or what type of tax policy you're maintaining. For example, in the area of capital gains, we've shown that when you maintain a reasonable capital gains rate, which is what we have today, you actually generate economic activity which wouldn't otherwise occur, and thus you create revenues that are fairly significant, and the projections are positive. In other words, after the capital gains reductions of the early 2000 period, we actually generated a massive increase in tax revenues for the federal government because people started freeing up assets which had been locked down for a long time. They decided not to sell them because they didn't want to pay the higher capital gains rates. Well, they started to sell them when you got a reasonable capital gains rate, and then they turned them over again and again and again, and all of that turning over created taxable events. So in a general statement, right, tax revenues probably won't increase dramatically as a result of maintaining these tax policies. But I'll tell you what will happen. If you raise the taxes the way the Obama administration wants to raise them, you will slow economic activity significantly.
But very quickly, I want to go and challenge us on this notion of government expansion. We're just coming out of a recession. Do you not believe government shouldn't, if business isn't spending money and isn't creating jobs, which they really haven't been up until the last couple of months, and even that is a trickle of creation, then shouldn't government, that seems to be the argument over time, is that government has to sort of step in and be the capital. Do you not believe that government should be that capital at that time?
Well, if it's done correctly, and the correct way to do it would have been to do a stimulus package which actually spent the money on capital activities today and a year ago, What we got was a stimulus package which created a lot of walking around money for a bunch of members of Congress who had certain programs they wanted to fund, like cocaine studies for monkeys. We just saw 100 different programs that Senator McCain and Senator Coburn have listed that were they're just outrageous. They're stupid on their face. And we know that most of the stimulus money is, well, almost 50% of it is going to be spent after the recession is over. It's going to be spent in 2012, 2013, 2014. If you're going to do a stimulus package, it should be done on capital activity, in other words, building roads, bridges, and schools and things like that, and do it quickly. Or you should keep tax rates down. That's another way the government can stimulate. But this idea of just giving walking around money to members of Congress so they can reward constituencies that vote for them, that's stupid, and it doesn't do anything but create debt and deficits.
All right, Senator Judd Gregg from New Hampshire, thanks for your time this morning, sir. We appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, let's do our